So, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're doing a real deep dive into a source that makes some pretty serious claims against the BBC, one of the most famous broadcasters in the world. It argues there's a toxic culture, a pattern of scandal, and a big question about whether it's wasting taxpayer money. So, let's get into how they build their case. So, the source hangs its entire argument on this single, pretty startling admission from the BBC's own leadership. And they frame this as well, not just some honest reflection, but as a shocking confession. Basically, an acknowledgement that the problems are so deep-seated they might actually be impossible to fix. Alright, so to build this case, the source points to what it calls a pattern of high-profile scandals. The argument here is that these aren't just one-off incidents, but symptoms of a much deeper systemic problem with the whole culture of the institution. The first stop is the infamous case of Jimmy Savile, and they really zoom in on this one specific detail, his caravan, right there in the BBC car park. The point they're making isn't just about Savile's horrific crimes, but about an environment that was openly tolerated and maybe even enabled that kind of behaviour right on its own doorstep. Then we jump forward to the much more recent case involving Huw Edwards, and the source highlights a very specific incident, meeting a total stranger for a beer after they just randomly contacted him online. The source holds this up as a huge lapse in professional judgment, even calling the decision itself madness. OK, next up we take a look at the allegations against DJ Scott Mills, but in this case it introduces a really crucial distinction, and this is central to the overall argument they're trying to make. And this right here is where the argument gets really interesting. It makes the point of separating the moral side of things from the legal side. By using this phrase, unwise but not illegal, it argues that even when no laws are technically broken, there's still what they see as this broader pattern of just poor judgment inside the organisation. And this is a super important point for understanding their argument. The source is very careful to state that Mills was fully exonerated and shouldn't be lumped in with convicted criminals. Its focus isn't just on, illegal acts, but on what it presents as this broader pattern of just poor judgment inside the organisation. OK, so the argument makes a big pivot here. It shifts from culture to cash. After laying out what it sees as this double failure, of culture and of value, they start to ask some really tough questions about the BBC's funding model, that mandatory licence fee that every household in the UK has to pay. So they put this number right up front, £176.50, the approximate fee every household with a TV is legally required to pay each year. And this figure is used to ask a very direct question. Is the public actually getting good value for their money? And to try and answer that question, the source puts the BBC head-to-head with its commercial rivals. It claims Channel 4's free streaming is more popular, that TalkSport has a better sports offering than 5 Live, and that Classic FM beats the BBC's classical stations. So the conclusion here is pretty blunt. In some really key areas, the taxpayer-funded service is losing out to the free market. Now, they do give the BBC credit for one thing, local radio. It calls it the one service the BBC genuinely does better than anybody else. But here's the twist. It then claims this one big success story has been starved of cash for years. OK, so after laying out what it sees as this double failure, of culture and of value, the source moves from just critiquing to proposing a solution. And wow, it's a pretty dramatic one. Now, what's really crucial to understand here is that they aren't saying get rid of the BBC entirely, it's proposing a massive restructuring. The plan is to basically accept the culture's unfixable, then franchise out major services like Radio 1 to private companies, and keep a small core like local news as the only real public service. And this quote, this really is the final word on the matter. It's a blunt summary of their entire argument. They're contending that the problems of culture and value are so bad now that the institution as it stands is just beyond any simple fixes.
And that really leaves us with the central question that this source is posing. It's laid out a structured case built on scandal, on financial questions, and what it calls cultural decay. And it challenges the very idea of a national broadcaster. After seeing the evidence they've presented, the final question is really for you to decide. Is the BBC, as they claim, truly out of control? Thank you for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. See you next time.